I joined the running group because I was lonely. That's the honest answer. I'd moved to the city 4 months before a job that turned out to be fine, but not exactly the social environment I'd hoped for. And by October, I was tired of spending my weekends alone and my mornings staring at my apartment ceiling. I found the group through a local Facebook page. Early morning runners. 3 days a week at Callaway Park. All levels welcome. 6 or 7 regulars based on the photos. Normal looking people. Mix of ages. Nothing about it that gave me pause. I commented that I was interested, and a woman named Deborah messaged me within an hour and told me to show up Thursday at 5:30, and that'd get me sorted. It was exactly what I needed. I fit in fast, got into the rhythm of it, and started actually looking forward to the mornings. Deborah was warm and funny and ran at my pace, and by the 3rd week, it felt like I'd been doing it for months. I didn't pay attention to Marcus until the 4th week. He'd been in the group longer than me, one of the regulars, quiet and kept to himself before and after runs. Nothing alarming about him, just a guy who was there for the running and not the socializing, which plenty of people are. I noticed him the way you notice any background person, just a part of the scenery. What I started noticing was where he was in the scenery. It was subtle enough that I second-guessed myself for a while. I'd drift to the left side of the path and look back, and he'd be on the left, the same distance behind me as always. I'd push my pace up a little, and he'd match it without seeming to try. I'd position myself differently at the start, and within the first quarter mile, he'd be behind me again. Always the same gap. Never closer, never further, like he was calibrated. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was the new person being self-conscious and reading too much into where people ran. I did this for about 2 weeks before I mentioned it to Deborah on a Tuesday morning after everybody else had left. She stopped drying her face with her towel and just held it there for a second. I asked her what that look was. She sat down on a bench and told me that about 5 months ago or so, there had been another woman in the group, newer like me, who had mentioned the same thing about Marcus. Said it had really been bothering her that she felt like he was always directly behind her. That it was making her uncomfortable. Deborah had told her she talked to the group organizer about it. The woman stopped coming before she got the chance. I asked her what her name was. Renee, said Deborah. I asked if anyone knew why she stopped coming. Deborah said no. She just stopped showing up one week, and nobody really followed up because people come and go from running groups, and there was no reason to think anything was wrong. I drove home and looked Renee up on the group's Facebook page. Her profile was still there, still listed as a group member. I clicked through to it and scrolled. Normal stuff going back a few years. Life updates, photos with friends, the kind of account that tells you a person is real and has lived. Nothing recent. The last post was about 5 months ago, but there were small activity markers that showed the account had been active more recently than that. A like on a friend's photo 3 weeks ago. Comment left on a community page 2 weeks back. I sat there looking at it for a long time. Then I sent her a message. I just introduced myself. Said I was new to the running group and said Deborah had mentioned her and I'd love to connect with someone else who'd been new recently. Casual. Nothing that would seem strange if she were just a normal person who had dropped out of the group for normal reasons. She responded in a few minutes. The message was warm and friendly and completely normal. She said that she'd had to drop out because of a schedule change at work and asked how I was liking the group, and then asked me if Deborah was still doing the post-run coffee thing on Tuesdays. I responded and we went back and forth for a few exchanges and it felt completely fine. Just 2 women chatting, and I started to feel stupid about why I looked her up in the first place. Then I asked her something specific. Deborah had mentioned to me once, just in passing during a run, that Renee had a dog that used to wait for her at the park entrance sometimes when her boyfriend brought it. A specific breed, kind of unusual one. I remembered that because I'd commented on it. I asked Renee what kind of dog she had. The response took longer than the others, maybe 3 minutes. Just a mixed breed. Pretty mutt, lol. I sat with that for a second, then I asked what her boyfriend's name was, and Deborah had mentioned it. Another long pause. Why are you asking me that? Not a name, not confusion about why I'd asked. Just that, flat and immediate. Why are you asking me that? I put my phone down on the table and stared at it. My heart was going in a way that felt disproportionate to what was technically just a weird Facebook exchange. I picked it back up and typed, I'm asking because I don't think you are Renee. I watched the 3 dots disappear. They pulsed for a long time, longer than any response should take. Then they stopped. No message. The account showed as active for another 30 seconds and then went offline. I called the non-emergency police line that night and they explained everything. The officer I spoke to was patient and took notes and told me somebody would follow up. 2 days later, a detective named Walsh called me and asked me to walk her through everything again in detail. I did. She asked me for screenshots of the conversation, which I sent, and told me she'd be in touch. She called back a few days later. Renee had not been seen by her close friends or family in 4 months. Her family had assumed she was going through something and pulling back. Her friends thought the same. Nobody had reported her missing because the Facebook account had stayed quietly active. Like here, a comment there. Just enough activity that people assumed she was still around and just offline socially. Somebody had been maintaining it, keeping it warm, making sure nobody worried. When Walsh looked into Marcus, he was gone. Moved out of his apartment sometime in the past week. No forwarding address on file, no contact information that led anywhere current, and the lease signed under a name that turned out to be only partially real. I stopped going to the running group. I know that's not a solution to anything, but couldn't make myself go back to that park in the dark at 5:30 in the morning. Not after all of it. Deborah understood. Walsh called me one more time, about 3 weeks after that first call. They had found Renee's phone, a storm drain about 2 miles from Callaway Park. Discarded, still had enough charge to power on. Most of it was wiped, but not everything. The last app to open before the phone was abandoned was Facebook Messenger. The last message sent from it was to a close friend, somebody she'd known for years. The message said, "Something is wrong with a man in my running group." It was sent 4 months ago, the week she disappeared. It went to a message request folder because Renee and her friend weren't Facebook friends despite knowing each other in real life. One of those gaps that happens. The friend never saw it. It sat in a folder unread for 4 months while everyone assumed Renee was just going through something. Marcus had not been found. I run alone now, a different park, a different time. Never the same route twice. I tell someone where I'm going every single time before I leave. I know that probably sounds like a bit too much. A few months ago I would have thought so too, but I don't think so anymore. This happened about 6 months ago, and I recently took an Uber for the first time since this incident, so I thought I'd share. I was leaving a work function at a bar around midnight in a large city, about an hour away from the suburban home I share with my partner. For reference, I'm a woman in my mid-20s with an average build. Not tall, not strong, definitely not threatening in any way, and I was a bit buzzed that night. I'm talking like 3 drinks, so not incapacitated in the slightest. Anyway, I'd ordinarily take a company car home, but I hadn't reserved one since I didn't know what time I'd be leaving, so I just decided to Uber. The company reimburses me for the bill anyway, so it makes no difference to me. Once the Uber pulls up, I say goodbye to my colleagues and get in the back seat. I'm always very nice to my Uber drivers, so I introduce myself. This driver, let's call him Ed, since I don't actually know his real name, seems totally normal. No red flags, and we make pleasant conversation for about 15 minutes, until we are squarely out of the city on the way to the suburbs. From this pleasant conversation, I learn he lives in a certain neighborhood not far from my home. Note that his neighborhood, while relatively nearby, would be completely out of the way on the route we are taking to my home. The conversation reaches its natural end, so I just stay a bit quiet and start looking at my phone, Reddit or whatever. The quiet is interrupted by his voice, suggesting I take a nap if I feel tired. It didn't even strike me as weird at first, so I just thanked him for the offer, but I wasn't that tired. He then said, "Oh, I always get sleepy when I'm drunk. Are you sure?" At this point, something in my body made me even more wide awake than before. I replied that I wasn't drunk, and like I had said, I just had a few drinks, so no need to nap. Haha. I'll be home soon enough anyway. He finally drops it after that, but I still thought it was really weird that he kept saying it. About 5 minutes later, he says that the highway has some weird construction going on and that the single lane traffic ahead would make my trip way longer than it needs to be. He asked me if it's okay to take another route. I oblige, already on edge and just wanting to be at home. My partner calls at that moment, asking when I'll be home, and I make sure to make it very clear I was talking to my significant other. Something was weird about this guy, and I wanted him to know that someone is expecting me at a specific time and knows where I am. After I hang up the phone, the Uber driver stays quiet and we get off the highway on a different exit than I've ever used. But I guess that's to be expected on a different route home. I'm BSing on my phone because I don't want to talk to this guy anymore. Not even looking up until he said, "My house is only 5 minutes from here." Okay. Pit in my stomach. I'm probably a good 25 minutes away from my house right now. A distance enlarged. I'd later learn artificially by a shortcut. I say some nonsense about how I like the neighborhood and how my boyfriend and I were thinking of moving here instead. Blah blah blah, basically anything I can think of to make it seem like I don't think this is weird and I'm not picking up any signals. Surprisingly, he doesn't say anything in response and now starts driving on a road in a direction I knew led to my house. Whew. Seems like we're on the right track now, right? Except not really. 15 minutes to go and my surroundings are more familiar. Just as I'm starting to feel more at ease, he starts asking questions about my boyfriend. So, what does he do? How long have you guys been together? And other seemingly normal questions. Finally, with about 10 minutes to go, he asks if my boyfriend makes me happy. He does, very much, so I gush a bit and say, yes, of course, he makes me very happy. Then he asks me if I make him happy. I thought that was weird, but humor is my defense mechanism, so I say, well, I should hope so. 8 minutes away, he turns onto a side street and pulls over on the side of the road. Looks back at me over his headrest and asks if I'd make him happy too. I said, what? Mostly because I can't even believe what's happening. He asked again, do you want to make me happy tonight? I took a second to think through my options. I'm alone with this guy who's behind the wheel, the street is dark, and I don't see any lights on at nearby houses. Close to 1 a.m. at this point on a weeknight, and I don't know what the heck this guy has in his car. I default to the response many women know to be the true barrier to men's advances. I don't think my boyfriend would like that very much. His weird grin falls away from his face and he says, well, he doesn't have to find out. Come on, make me happy. I know a few ways you could start. I tell him my boyfriend is expecting me home any minute, and besides, I love him and I didn't want to hurt him. Can you please just take me home? I carry a small knife and a little canister of mace, but all I could think of was to appeal to this guy's sensitive side. Somehow it actually worked and he didn't say another word after that. Just turned back around and silently drove me home. Weirdly enough, I say thanks as I get out of the car. Old habits die hard, I guess, and that was that. I go into my house and start crying immediately for some reason as soon as I hug my partner. He tells me I need to contact Uber immediately and tell them what happened so that this guy doesn't try to take advantage of anyone else. I agree and pull up the app to file the complaint. Except when I look at my last ride, the picture in the profile was 100% not the same guy who drove me home. The car was the same but not the driver. The guy in the photo was a completely different person. Maybe early 40s. The guy who drove me home was just barely older than me. Uber never followed up with me and just refunded my money. I did tell the police what happened because my partner insisted, but they didn't take me very seriously since nothing actually happened. I was worried for a little while since this guy knew where I lived, but apparently it's long forgotten since I just took an Uber today. Moral of the story. Always make sure the photo in your Uber driver's profile matches the person who's driving the car. I moved into the basement apartment on a Friday in February. I'd taken it sight unseen. Beyond a few photos online because I needed something fast and the price was low enough that I could actually breathe for a few months while I got settled into the new city. The building was a converted older home with 3 units, mine in the basement and 2 above it. The landlord lived directly upstairs in the middle unit. His name was Jerry. He met me at the door on move-in day with a handshake and a spare key and a list of building rules typed out on a single sheet of paper and laminated, which should have told me something about the kind of man he was, but I was tired from the drive and not paying close enough attention. He was in his mid-60s, average height, slim with close-cropped gray hair, and small pale eyes that were always slightly more focused than the situation called for. Friendly in a way I couldn't find any fault with specifically, but that never quite felt warm. He helped me carry 2 boxes and without being asked, and then stood in my living room for a few minutes longer than necessary, making conversation before I got him out. The apartment itself was fine. Low ceilings, small windows up near ground level, and a little dark even during the day, but clean and functional. I set up my stuff over the weekend and started work Monday and told myself I'd made a reasonable decision. The first thing I noticed was the schedule thing. About 2 weeks in, I was heading out for work and Jerry was coming down the stairs from his unit at the same moment, which I thought was a coincidence. Then it happened 3 days in a row and I started paying attention. He seemed to always be in the shared entryway or the parking lot or the laundry room at the exact times I was coming or going. Not every time, but enough that I started clocking it. He'd make small talk and how work was going and mention something about the building. Nothing inappropriate, just always there. Then he started knowing things. Small things at first. He asked one morning how the Thai place was, and I hadn't told him I'd ordered Thai the night before. He mentioned once that I sounded like I had a rough call, and I had. I had a difficult work call that had upset me, and I'd taken it in my bedroom with the door closed and my voice pretty low. He asked me how my back was doing after I'd spent a Saturday moving furniture around. A Saturday he wasn't home for. A Saturday I hadn't spoken to him out at all. I told myself old building and thin floors and walls, so I told myself he was just perceptive. I also told myself I was being paranoid and that a nosy landlord was annoying, but not a reason to break at least 2 months in. I was very good at explaining these things away back then. I found the hole on a Wednesday night in April. I'd been lying in bed reading, and the lamp on my nightstand was throwing light up at the ceiling at an angle it didn't usually hit, and something in the corner caught my eye. I got up and stood under it and looked. A small dark circle, maybe the diameter of a pencil, in the corner where the ceiling met the wall. I got my phone's flashlight and stood on the bed and looked directly into it. There was a lens inside it. I stood there on my bed for a long moment just breathing. Then I got down and got a piece of black electrical tape from my desk drawer and covered it completely and pressed it flat and went to bed. I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark listening to the sounds of the building and thinking about every conversation Jerry and I ever had and recontextualizing all of it and feeling sick. I woke up at 7 and the first thing I did was look at the ceiling. The tape was gone. I got up and walked to the corner and looked up. The hole was there, same size, same position, but the ceiling around it was slightly different. Fresh paint, matched perfectly to the existing color, feathered out around the hole so it blended. Done carefully, done by somebody who knew what they were doing. Done while I was asleep in the bed 6 feet away. I stood in my bedroom in the early morning and understood very clearly that whatever this was, it was not something I could rationalize anymore. I didn't confront him. I want to be clear about that choice because looking back, I think it's the reason I'm here to write this. Instead, I went to a hardware store before work and bought a small Wi-Fi camera, the kind people use for pet monitoring, and set it up on my bookshelf, pointed directly at the hole in the ceiling before I left for work. I angled it so it looked like it was just sitting there among my books. I reviewed the footage on my lunch break. At 11:08 in the morning, I think, 2 hours after I left, my bedroom door opened. Jerry walked in with a key. He was carrying a small paint kit and a roll of tape. He walked directly to the corner without looking around, like he'd been there 100 times, peeled something off the ceiling that I couldn't make out from the camera angle, touched up the area around the hole for about 4 minutes, packed up his kit, and turned to leave. Then he stopped. He turned back toward the room and stood at the foot of my bed and looked at it. He just stood there with his hands at his sides looking at my unmade bed in the empty apartment. I watched the timestamp count upward. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. For 4 minutes and 18 seconds, he stood at the foot of my bed looking at it before he finally walked out and pulled the door shut behind him. I sat in my car in the work parking lot for a long time after watching that. I knew I needed to go to the police. I also knew what I had so far. A landlord who entered my apartment, which was a violation but not necessarily criminal on its own, without more context, and a hole in my ceiling that I couldn't yet prove he put there. I needed more, so that night when I watched from my window and saw Jerry's car pull up out of the lot at 8 p.m., I took the emergency spare key he'd given me on move-in day and I went upstairs. His apartment was a mirror image of mine in layout but felt nothing like it. The living room was sparse and impersonal. No photos, no warmth at all, just furniture arranged with the kind of clinical precision. The kitchen was the same, and I moved quickly, checking rooms, telling myself I'd look for 10 minutes or so and leave. The back bedroom door was padlocked from the outside. A padlock on the outside of an interior bedroom door in a man's own apartment. I stood in the hallway looking at it and felt a particular cold that comes not from temperature, but from understanding something you can't take back. I went back to my apartment and got my bolt cutters from the storage closet where I kept my bike gear. I went back upstairs and cut the lock, opened the door and found the light switch and stood in the doorway for a long moment before I could make myself go in. The room had no furniture. What it had instead, covering every wall floor to ceiling, was a system. Multiple monitors on a folding table against the far wall are showing live feeds. The building entryway, the laundry room, the parking lot, and the hallway outside my door. Feeds from cameras I had never seen and couldn't account for. The walls themselves were covered in printed photographs and documents, organized by section, each section separated by strips of blue painter's tape. 6 sections in total, 6 different people and 6 different sets of photos and notes and printed records. Some of the photos were taken through windows. Some were taken inside apartments, from angles that could have only come from hidden cameras. Each section had a name written at the top in neat block letters, and below the name, a printed schedule, financial records pulled from the mail or documents, relationship information, and family contacts. Years of accumulated detail on each person, built slowly and methodically the way you'd build a case file. 4 of the 6 sections had a thick red diagonal line drawn through them from corner to corner. Those people were gone. I found out a year later that 2 of them had simply moved away and could be accounted for. The other 2 are still listed as open missing persons cases in 2 different counties. I didn't know that while standing in that room. I just knew the red lines felt like something being closed. My section was on the wall directly facing the door. The largest section, the most recent, the most densely covered. Months of photographs, schedules, and notes written in small, precise handwriting about my habits and patterns and routines. Photos taken through my bedroom window, my living room window, and inside my apartment from camera angles I still can't fully account for. In the center of my section, pinned at eye level, was a photograph of me asleep in my bed, taken the previous night, while my camera was pointed at the ceiling, while I was lying 6 feet away in the dark. At the bottom of my section, written directly on the wall in black marker, was a date, 3 days from that night. I called 911 from the street, sat in the curb across from the building with my phone and my bolt cutters and waited. They arrested Jerry 2 hours later coming back to the building. His name wasn't even Jerry. I'm not going to put his real name here, but it just wasn't Jerry. Know that. And the identity he'd used to purchase the building was constructed. He'd done this before. 2 other properties, 2 other cities, and the same setup in a back room each time. The detective who called me a week later was careful with what she shared but told me enough. She told me they found 19 cameras in my apartment. Not 1, 19, placed in every room over a period of months. Systematically, 1 by 1, I'd found one. I had been living for weeks thinking I'd found the thing, and there were 18 others I never knew about. I asked about the date on the wall. She was quiet for a moment and then said they were looking into it. She never called me back about that specifically. I've stopped expecting her to. And no, I don't live there anymore. I don't live in a basement anymore. Don't think I ever will again. I sleep with 2 cameras of my own in my bedroom now, and I check the footage every morning before I do anything else. I think about those 4 minutes at the foot of my bed more than anything. More than the cameras, more than the room upstairs, more than the date on the wall. Just a man standing alone in a stranger's empty apartment, staring at an unmade bed for 4 minutes in complete silence. I don't know what he was thinking about. I think that's the part I'm most grateful not to know. About 2 years ago when I was 17, I received a Facebook message from somebody named Dan who I didn't recognize. I had mutual friends with him and he looked to be around the same age as me, so I wasn't alarmed. What follows are the messages. Dan: hello, how have you been? Haven't seen you in a few years. Me: not trying to be rude, but do we know each other? Yeah, you really don't know me? I didn't respond to that. Wow, a nice way to treat a family friend, Dan said. Sorry, I just don't recognize you. Dan then sent a picture of me and him together from when we were little, and I mean really little. I looked maybe 2 to 3, and he looked 5 to 6. Oh wow, did our parents used to be friends or something? Dan: I was your neighbor. You really don't recognize me? Come on, I didn't move that long ago. He had in fact moved a long time ago, at least 12 years. So I honestly feel like it's not that uncommon for me to not recognize someone who I haven't seen or talked to since I was 4. Anyways, the conversation continued like that. I apologized for not remembering him and just started catching up. He was being nice enough and I was bored, so whatever. No harm, no foul. After we kept talking, I started remembering more about him. Like, I remembered him coming over and swinging in my backyard, and me going over to his house with my big brother, and all of us hanging out together. Dan was a few years older than me, at least 2, but I can't remember exactly. Anyways, we kept talking on Facebook, just messaging back and forth about normal things, until it started to get late and I was tired and had school the next day, so I told him I was going to bed. I closed my computer and just laid down and went to sleep. The next morning I woke up to a bunch of messages from him. Things like, "Good night, beautiful," or "Sweet dreams. Message me when you wake up," and "Are you asleep yet? Can't wait to talk to you." Literally, there were almost 50 messages. In a way, I was kind of flattered that I was getting that much attention, but like more than anything, I was creeped out. I opened the messages, kind of glanced through them, and just didn't reply. On my phone, I have set it where I don't get notifications from Facebook Messenger. At the time, I was in a lot of group chats with different team sports and group of friends, so it was just easier to, at the end of the day, check my messages versus getting a ton of notifications all day long. At some point during the day, I had gotten more messages from him that I just hadn't noticed while I was at school. He was saying stuff like, "You still live at insert address here?" I did still live there. "Does your mom still freak out about you hanging out with boys?" What? No, my mom has never freaked out over boys. "Let's go out and catch up. Let me take you out and treat you right." He kept going on and on with really random questions that weren't necessarily threatening but somewhat creepy to me, and then him talking about wanting to go on dates. He didn't even live in the same state anymore that I lived in, so I have no idea how he would have planned on going on dates with me. The messages just kept coming over the next week. Him telling me that he wants to go on dates and asking me really weird questions about my mom, my brother, and my house, and then he started asking about his house that he used to live in. I didn't reply to any more of the messages, but I was getting at least 50 a day. I'm not sure why I didn't block him. I think I was kind of entertained in a way, like I thought it was funny. Eventually, I brought it up to my mom and just asked her if she remembered Dan from next door. Her face was completely drained of color and she got super serious all of a sudden. She asked me why I was bringing him up. I told her that he had messaged me on Facebook and was trying to get me to go on a date with him and was just trying to catch up. I didn't tell her he'd been messaging me 50 plus times a day at this point and that I wasn't responding. She told me to block him and never message him again, and I said why. And this is a summary of what she told me. When I was 3 to 4, I used to play over at his house a lot. His mom would always offer to babysit me if my mom had to quickly go out and run errands, and he also had a little sister who was around my age. So my mom figured it was a perfect opportunity for a play date between Dan, my brother, me, and Dan's little sister. One day when I came home after one of these play dates, my mom asked me and my brother what we had done that day. My brother started talking about how he had watched some movie, I don't know what one, and I apparently told my mom that Dan had brushed my hair for me. My mom thought that was a little weird. What 6-year-old boy is going to want to brush a 3-year-old girl's hair? She asked a couple more questions. She doesn't really remember the details, and I don't really remember them either, saying I was a toddler, but somehow it came out that he wasn't brushing my hair. He had been taking the brush and rubbing it all over my body while I was only in my underwear. I'm not going to get more explicit than that, and no, nothing more serious happened, thankfully. It was more just weird than anything. My brother didn't know anything about this because we had been in Dan's room and my brother had been in the living room with Dan's little sister. After that, my mom didn't let me go back over to his house. Apparently, when my mom confronted his mom about it, a huge fight broke out. Not physically, but a screaming match. It turns out that Dan had been doing similar stuff to his little sister, but it had escalated farther than it had with me. My mom threatened to report them to the police or Child Protective Services. She did both, but before much could be done, they moved out and found somewhere else to live. They were renting. After hearing that from my mom, I immediately blocked Dan on Facebook. I wasn't quick enough, I guess. However, because he messaged a bunch of my friends on Facebook asking about me and had changed his relationship status to taken and in a relationship with me. He then followed me on Instagram and found my Snapchat somehow. He liked and commented on almost all of my Instagram pictures and sent me a bunch of Snapchats. I have a feeling you can guess the kinds of pictures. I quickly blocked him on both, and luckily he never figured out my phone number. I haven't heard from him since and haven't heard anything about it. When I was 12 years old, my family and I lived in an old apartment complex. I say old because it's been standing for well over 50 years by the time we moved in. Some residents have claimed to have lived there their whole lives. Anyway, one particular thing that stuck out to me is that there was a strict no pets policy. The landlord actually elaborated on this, stating that a copious number of pets seem to go missing around the area and they now restrict pets in hopes that it will end the problem there. As a child, I kept pretty much to myself. As for my brothers, who are 2 to 3 years older than me, they spoke and played with every kid that lived in the apartments and surrounding areas. Every day after school, they'd beg our mother for some change so they could visit the quote-unquote candy lady. She was a local resident in the apartments who held a mini mart in her apartment. Basically, she'd buy snacks in bulk, ranging from gummy snacks to chips, so she could resell them to the neighborhood kids. I'd never been at that point, but was, of course, curious. I'd asked my brothers if I could join them, and they declined, so I stole, I know, $1 from my mom's purse and followed my brothers and their friends so I could find out where she lived. Upon stalking them, I finally found out her apartment location. Though they stayed inside for a while, I figured I'd just go the next day. The next day after school, I took my stolen $1 and headed out to the candy lady's apartment. When she opened the door first, she was an older Caucasian lady with a welcoming demeanor. She let me in and asked for my name. When I gave it to her, I asked for hers. She said to just call her the candy lady. She seemed sweet and thoughtful, asking me about school and if I lived in the area. Kids usually don't come here alone. Where are your friends? She asked me. I explained that I don't really have any and that I prefer to just observe. She seemed to sympathize with me because she then told me to take anything I want free of charge. As a child, I indulged in taking as much as I could carry. While thanking her on my way out, she said to me, Come back anytime, my friend. I felt pretty jolly at that point. 1, I got free snacks, and 2, I actually made a friend. When I got home, I hid my snacks in my drawers, returned my mother's stolen dollar, and felt great overall. That is, until I went back. I returned maybe 3 or 4 days after the first time. When I knocked, she answered the door frantically. I was kind of scared, so I told her I could just come back later. After realizing it was me, she told me no worries and insisted I come in. When I did, she asked if I came back for some free snacks. I gleefully told her yes, but she said that the first time was a kind gesture, but from now on I'd have to help her with a few things to earn my free snacks. I was used to working for things, so I agreed. It was simple enough. Just throw out her trash for her. I figured she was old and probably couldn't go outside much. The weird thing was she had me take her garbage out to the dumpsters in the apartments next door. Fast forward to a month later, it had become our regular schedule. After school, I'd do my homework, then head over to her place to throw her garbage as well as collect my earnings. It was all easy breezy for a while. That is, until one day she didn't tie the trash bag all the way. I walked all the way down to the dumpsters next door, and before I threw it in, I decided I'd tie it first. It was loose, so I had to untie it to fix it all the way. Curious little me couldn't help but look inside. There I saw wadded up paper towels drenched in blood and hair. There were also more black plastic bags at the bottom of the bag. This freaked me out so much that I just dropped the bag right then and there and booked it home. As soon as I got home, I cried to my mother about my discovery. She said she'd go out and see it for herself after I told her which dumpster. When she returned, she said she didn't see what was inside because the candy lady was already there throwing it out when she arrived. My mother didn't say a word to her and just left. She told me she didn't want me going out that far anymore and to stop helping with other people's chores, completely neglecting what I had initially told her. Surprisingly, I was able to just forget, more like ignore what happened and go about my kid life like nothing happened. Then, my brothers came rushing back home one day. They anxiously explained to my mom, who is as nosy as ever regarding neighbors, that the candy lady was taken away by the police. My mother dismissed it and told us to mind our business. My brothers were bummed out though because of their future lack of snacks. As a child at this point in time, I didn't really understand the police and all that, so I was pretty much clueless about what happened. About a month ago, I had dinner with my mom. I'm now 22 years old, by the way. My mother and I got to reminiscing, and we started talking about those old apartments. After discussing how old and broken down they were, I asked her if she remembered what I told her I saw. First, she didn't. Then I mentioned that she was arrested by the police. Then the shock of realization hit her. She said she remembered and that she actually asked the landlord about it shortly after she was taken away. Apparently, the landlord told her that the candy lady was actually killing and skinning animals she found nearby. So she's the reason why pets weren't allowed. She was killing them and doing who knows what with the skin. And I'm the dumbass little kid who got rid of the evidence for her. For those of you wondering, the management of the apartments next to ours, the one with the dumpsters we used to dispose of the evidence, caught wind of the smell reeking from the dumpsters. And from there, they were able to catch the candy lady. All I know is I'm glad I never went back once I realized what was in the bag of trash that she had me take out multiple times. To the crazy candy lady, please stay away from me. P.S. If you're the candy lady listening to this right now, I refuse to believe that you were ever my first friend. So I had known this woman since before I could remember. She was really good friends with my mom and dad through high school, so I already knew her before all of this. Unfortunately, my mother was an alcoholic and a pill addict, which led to pretty bad neglect for several years when I was very young. Maybe a story for another day. After missing most of my 3rd grade year, DCS got involved and my dad got custody of me. He was with my stepmother at the time, and at first everything was fairly normal. She was like an older sister, a friend. It wasn't too long before I noticed things started to change. One day when I was about 9, I was sitting on the living room floor playing with my back against the couch. Stepmother crossed the living room to go down to the hallway and, as she did, seemed to shoulder check the doorway. As soon as she did this, she turned around and started yelling at me, accusing me of pushing her. I stared at her dumbfounded because I hadn't moved from my spot on the floor. She continued yelling and accusing me as I tried to rationalize it in my head. Maybe I got up and don't remember, but why would I push her? I really had no negative feelings towards her at this point, so it didn't make any sense. But she was an adult and I was a kid. Surely she knew what she was talking about. My stepmother was a tall, skinny woman with long golden blonde hair, straightened through the length with those poofy 80s bangs on top. She typically wore high-waisted jeans and kept long, pristine red nails that would end up being a horrifying symbol to me in my teen years. Things only got worse as I got older. I would speak to my mom on occasion over the phone or in a letter the first few years. but each time I did, my stepmother would become more and more hostile towards me, claiming that my contact with my mother was making me misbehave. But I was always an introvert. I loved reading in school, and I was a bit of a nerd and hated getting into trouble, so this accusation didn't make any sense to me even then, but what could I do about it? Before too long, I noticed that my stepmom looked for any opportunity alone with me to treat me however she wanted. She quickly became extremely militant. Each morning, she woke me up for school by bursting into my room and aggressively jerking the covers off my body. Some mornings, even grabbing my feet, digging her nails in and twisting my toes. I was expected to follow a strict schedule on school mornings. 6:15 out of bed, 6:15 to 6:25 a.m. get dressed for school, 6:25 a.m. to breakfast. At this time, I was expected to stand in the exact center point of the threshold between the kitchen and the dining room, ready to take my breakfast and sit in my spot at the table. 6:35 a.m. done with breakfast, 6:35 to 6:45 finish getting ready for school, 6:45 be sitting cross-legged in the center of the living room waiting on everyone to be ready. If I did not follow this schedule down to the minute, punishment would be doled out. She would grab my hands while taking my breakfast, twisting one or two fingers out of socket, pulling me close, and grating her teeth at me with glaring, hateful eyes. Sometimes she would step in, including my finding her heels into my bare skin, twisting and glaring hate into me. On a few occasions, she even broke my wood hair brushes across my face, leaving busted blood vessels and massive bruises. When the damage was too obvious, she would try to hide me for a day or so, gently waking me the next morning, acting as though I were sick and telling me that I was too ill to go to school, brushing my hair back and telling me to go to sleep. This treatment rolled over into my days after school and would evolve into other aggressive behaviors. She made sure to conceal any sign of mistreatment from my father, but still some happened right under his nose. At the dinner table, she would dig her toes into my leg and scrape so hard that she would shave off chunks of skin from my shins with her toenails. Even at church, placing what looked like an affectionate hand on my back, but would proceed by giving me an extremely painful and deep pinch on my back, leaving huge bruises in their place that no one else would see. I was given an hour and a half after school each day to do my homework. After that, I was expected to go to our playroom, where I was to entertain her daughter. My stepmother's daughter was between 5 and 7 when things started to get really bad. I was expected to play what she wanted, when she wanted, and abide by any requests made. This was never said but understood, and later learned the hard way. One day during the summer, while eating lunch with her daughter in the playroom, she asked me to open her dessert. She had a kid cuisine that she had merely taken all 2 bites of. Stepmother would typically leave the plastic on her dessert as a system to encourage her to eat her dessert first. Of course, when she asked me to open it, I asked her if she was done eating her meal, passively addressing the fact she had barely touched it. I was about 14 at the time, and it seemed like a plausible thing to big sister her about, but when I didn't give her what she wanted, she got up in a huff to go tattle to her mother, as most 6-year-olds do. My stepmother was immediately enraged and barreled down the hallway in my direction. I don't even think I was out of view of her daughter when she grabbed me by the hair and started dragging me. I tried to keep up but lost my balance and fell to the floor as she continued to drag me down the hallway by my hair. Once we reached my bedroom, she started kicking me in the stomach and then pulled me to my feet to face my bed. She then began rummaging through my belt drawer and pulled out my woven leather belt that she had already used more than once and proceeded to beat me with it, starting at my shoulder blades all the way down to my ankles. If I screamed, she would beat me more. The abuse also did not stop with the physical, as she seemed to get a kick out of bullying me. This, she wasn't so worried about hiding from my father, as she would make it seem lighthearted and jovial when he was around. One evening, while having a family dinner at one of our local go-to sit-downs, she started kicking me under the table, passing me horribly evil glares. After a few minutes of this, she spoke up. "You chew like a cow. Why can't you chew right?" My dad laughed, thinking it was meant lightheartedly, but as he looked down at his meal again, her death glare staring a hole through me with a tight jaw and gritted teeth told me otherwise. This became a new target for her abuse. She did this again later when she noticed that I walked on the inside of my house shoes. One day, kicking me in the back of the knees, making me fall to the floor. She began kicking me in the back, knocking the wind out of me, all simply over the way I walked. This became my daily life. Speaking out seemed ridiculous because all of these punishments just felt so absurd. I didn't tell anyone about it for the longest time, but as I got older, people around me got wiser. When I was in middle school, my dad and stepmother were called in for questioning by the school. 2 of my teachers were highly suspicious of my bruises and constantly swollen fingers. The stepmother proceeded to put on an act, crying and acting hurt, and shocked that they think that she could hurt a child. I changed schools after that year, but things only got worse when I went to high school, as she seemed intimidated by my aging and gaining maturity. Male friends were off limits, and my curves would be hidden in horribly unflattering clothes. I didn't really mind so much, as I really had very little interest in boys or displaying my womanhood to any degree at all. However, one afternoon while taking a shower, she burst in the bathroom to remind me of my timing. As she whipped the bath curtain open, she saw the hair going below my waist. Before I could react, she grabbed the hair and jerked it down, pulling out a handful of my pubic hair. She cursed at me for not telling her that I had started maturing in that way. Couldn't tell anyone about that for years. After the belt beating, however, my stepmother's sister-in-law saw my backside and called my dad at work, cursing him and threatening to report it. I started going to her house on the weekends after that. After this, I got braver and became less scared. Once I saw people reacting to what little they saw of my stepmother's behavior, I knew I was in the right for sticking up for myself. So I did, in subtle ways at first. I brought jewelry and makeup to school and started to give myself space to express myself. Then one morning, while running a minute or two behind on breakfast, my stepmom came to the kitchen in a rage. Why wasn't I finishing getting ready for school? Before I could turn around from rinsing my dishes, she was rummaging in the utensil drawer and pulled out a fork. She backed me against the kitchen counter, pressing the fork to my throat. I don't remember what she said to me in those moments, but I remember her hot breath in my ear, hissing through her teeth at me, and I remember the chill of the cold metal prongs in my throat. I was 16. My last day, there was a field day of my junior year. I decided to wear a cute outfit that her sister-in-law had bought for me for casual days. It was a cute cap-sleeved striped t-shirt, cute femininely to suit my curves with long matching shorts. I knew she wouldn't like it, but I also knew that it was completely appropriate for a girl my age, even very conservative in my opinion to my other peers. She saw me as I was walking down the hallway towards my bedroom, and I saw the rage fill her. She came at me nails first, grabbing my arms and digging her nails in. This was when I snapped and fought her off, shoving her into a wall. Rage filled me as I went to the living room to grab the phone. If you touch me again, I'm calling the police. She went pale, and suddenly I wasn't scared for myself anymore. I couldn't control myself and laughed. You're scared, I said, suddenly enlightened. Her face went blank as she walked towards me. If I have to make your dad choose between you and me, it's not going to be you, she said coldly. I ignored this sentiment because I knew she was delusional to think something like that. I went to my bedroom and packed a bag. She didn't even try to stop me, but she did make sure to let me know that if I left, I wasn't welcome back. I ended up spending that summer in Florida with my stepmother's sister-in-law and moved in with my grandmother for the next several years. I only saw my stepmom again once in my 20s. She had left my dad by the time I was out of high school for the man she had been cheating on with. She and I spoke briefly on Facebook the next year, and I confronted her about what she had put me and my dad through. Her response: I'm sorry if you ever felt unloved, I was just really stressed and you were a pretty rebellious kid. This happened during the summer of 2015, and I had just graduated high school and I still lived in my hometown. I was out with some friends and it was getting really late, like around 1 a.m., so I decided to head home. I stopped by a drugstore close to my house that was 24/7 to pick up some aspirin and snacks. The one I went to was in the same parking lot as a supermarket. Important. I parked my car close to the store and it was empty. There were no more than 2 other cars in this giant parking lot and I was nowhere near them. I head in and grab what I came to get quickly because I had this overwhelming feeling of dread the whole time. I felt like somebody was watching me, but I couldn't see anyone else there besides me and the cashier. Then after I had gotten everything I intended to buy, I stalled checking out and just went aisle by aisle looking at random things because I thought whoever was out there would leave if I took too long. Really, the whole time I thought I was being paranoid because I wasn't used to going out late. Strict parents growing up. About 20 minutes after that, I pay and leave the store. I get to the door and literally bolt to my car, pepper spray in hand, and lock myself in. I turn my head to check the back seat, and right before I could breathe a sigh of relief because nobody was there, someone tapped on my window. I looked around before I left the store near the entrance, and nobody was around my car, so how did I not see a person there? This is where I really freaked out. I don't know if this person was Ted Bundy inspired or what, but it was odd. He was a very handsome blonde man with slightly long hair and a cast on his arm. Now, my first instinct was to drive off, but he was leaning on the front hood part of my car, and I didn't want to hurt him, so I rolled my window down just an inch so he could speak and maybe back up just a bit so I could drive off without hitting him. But nope, he stayed glued on my car. He then asked me if I could help him with directions and look up an address for him. I said, I really need to go, sir. Maybe ask in the drugstore. They can help, surely. Already went to the supermarket, and they couldn't help, he said. That place closed at 8, and there was no way this guy had just been lurking around for 5 hours waiting for some random girl's help. He then went on about feeling really tired and if I could just give him water or food I bought since he had no money. I told him okay and began to reach to my passenger side to grab the chips I got and began to roll the window down slightly, and like I expected, he moved closer to my window, but he was now off the car, so I hit the gas. He chased my car and I heard a scraping sound on the side as I pulled away. I don't drive directly home in case I was followed and drove down the highway for an hour because I was so distraught over what happened. I finally got home and my entire side of my car had been scraped from the door almost to the trunk. I'm really sure he used a knife or some sharp object because it was a really rough scrap. I reported the incident, but they never found him or any similar incidents in my town. He was watching me the whole time, maybe from the windows of the store, because how else would he have known that I bought food? I also think he hid behind my car so I couldn't see him when I came out. I feel like he was trying to get me before I got in my car, but I got in too fast. The story starts at the beginning of the school year, 2017, sophomore year. Gym class rolls in and a kid I know picks a locker really close to me. I don't mind because I thought he was chill and stuff. However, more and more I notice him peering at me while I'm changing. Now, I know it's all fun and games and stuff to be bros and joke about bodies and stuff, so I don't mind at all until the peering became not only constant, but more and more obvious, to the point where he literally watches me while he gets dressed the whole time. I still haven't taken any action because I thought, well, maybe he's just socially awkward or gay or something, so I don't want to frame him as a creep. So I go minding my own business and do nothing about it. The swim unit comes and we start doing laps. However, I notice that he diverges from the rest and tries to swim closer to me. I get into a conversation with him and he's acting normal now, but then he gets too close to me and starts touching me with his leg under the water. I'm like, that's really strange, and I back off a bit. A couple more days of this pass by, and one time during some back and forth swimming routines, he literally gets way too close for comfort when there is plenty of space elsewhere. I then tell him, hey dude, do you mind? Sort of low on some space here. And he doesn't say anything and moves away a tiny bit, but not too much. Still really creeping me the heck out. But hey, maybe socially awkward or gay still, I thought. I go back to my locker after the routine is over and it starts to change, but then once again he starts staring at me creepily. That's when I decided to change my locker to a diagonally facing section locker in the back where he can barely see me at all. After I changed the locker, things got significantly better. He's not peering as often. I do sometimes catch him by meeting eye contact until he looks away. However, now during gym, this kid is actively trying to move closer to me, even squeezing through the class to get closer to me. And you see, I would be fine with this, but he always tries to get in front of me where I can see him or really close behind me where it's creepy, so I try to surround myself with some friends and see if that makes him stop. But no, somehow he still manages. He also comes out of the lockers right after I do, which signifies that he probably waits for me. I decide to run another test to be sure he's just not trying to be friendly. Outside, while waiting for everyone to change their gym clothes to normal clothes to continue classes, I decide to leave earlier before the gym teacher comes and see if he follows. He never leaves early, but sure enough, when I started to leave, I noticed him following in the reflection. So I started to run and I shook him off and returned to gym class to wait. He never returned and he definitely was following me because there is no way that he took the same turns and everything. Fast forward another couple of days of me doing the exact same thing and I decide to do one more last test. If this works, then he is 100% definitely a creep. My plan was to change fast and run into the gym before anyone else and climb all the way up the folded bleachers, basically having a bird's eye view of him coming through the entrance without him seeing me. So I try the plan. Get ready, change really fast, sprint up the stairs, and climb those bleachers really high. I'm really scared of heights, but I needed an answer. 5 seconds later, I don't even know how he did it that fast. He walks through the door, doesn't see me almost right above him, and he says some words I feared. Where the heck is he? I shudder, but I stay quiet. He then exits, but I decide to wait. He decides to try another entrance and then spots me on the bleachers and then realizes that I was there the whole time. We locked eye contact and his eyes were very cold. He then slowly walks away to where the class starts and I stay up there for a while until other people start gathering in. I tried one more time, but he didn't fall for it. He came out with the rest of the guys for once. He still follows me around during class and I try my hardest to shake him off. I'm planning to confront him about it soon, but I really don't want to. He still peeks at me as he passes by in the locker rooms and now I change really quick, so I ask to get away and not give him the pleasure of looking at me. Yeah, pretty freaky. He's also in a couple of my other classes, which doesn't help. Doing things like bumping into me or walking real close to me, or even just glancing at me. But since those classes are more crowded, it feels a bit safer. But it's almost a new year, so yeah. If you're listening to this, kid, please stop. I really don't want to be rude, but just stop. It's so annoying and creepy. Thanks for listening. I had a friends with benefits relationship with a guy named Judah beginning in 2018. He came along during one of those doomed, let's open our relationship as a last-ditch effort not to break up relationships, and I enjoyed his presence but didn't necessarily feel a deep connection. My relationship with Judah tapered off amicably, with our interactions becoming limited to liking each other's Tumblr posts and occasional Snapchats. After a while of no interaction, Judah contacted me for some writing advice. I wanted to be genuinely useful, so I wrote a few paragraphs of heartfelt constructive feedback, and he thanked me for my input, and after that point, our interaction ceased. Not long after I'd written this out, I had begun receiving some vicious anonymous messages on Tumblr. The first few were insulting my appearance and my art-making ability. I shrugged it off. Random trolls are as common as gnats, and at this point, I didn't think anything of it. The messages continued rolling in, and they began to become more and more disturbingly specific. The harasser began to imply that they knew where I lived and dropped that they knew what school I went to, which wasn't information readily available on my blog. At this point, I knew that I had to be receiving them from somebody that I knew in real life, or from a creep who was dedicated enough to figure out my full name from the clues on my blog. Difficult, but not impossible. It was at this point that I began to suspect Judah. Extremely few people from my real life knew my Tumblr IRL, and he was the only person who I could guess had any motive for jealous harassment, since we weren't talking anymore. I didn't think he was the type of person to act like that, but crazy people can be very talented at hiding their crazy. I blocked him on all social media and assumed I'd be moving on with my life. Wrong. The messages became more frequent and creepier. They began making fun of my disabilities and threatening physical attacks. A common thing among the messages was about how being disabled makes me useless and undesirable. Strangely, Christianity kept being brought into it, as they claimed that my illnesses were a result of God's punishment. I had started to dread whenever the new message icon appeared, so I turned off anonymous messaging. This message did not prevent me from further harassment, because this began the series of dedicated harassment accounts, with the first messages coming from a brand new account called Asshole Chaos Bringer. The tone of the interactions began to turn noticeably more occult. The messages started to talk about how Satan is displeased with me. I blocked the account. From this, I became confident that it was a single person sending me all these messages, despite the fact that they tried to sound as though they were coming from different sources. Hateful messages were, and still are, exceedingly rare for me, and there was clearly a person very dedicated to trying to freak me out. I suspected Judah even more, but didn't have enough evidence and didn't choose to confront him. After blocking of the Asshole Chaos Bringer account, I began receiving messages from another shiny new account, the same name with a number 2 at the end. The messages from this account truly take the cake for batshittery. Message 1. I almost feel bad that the demons I work for have been telling me to torment you so much. You already are the way you are. Isn't that torment enough? I almost feel some mercy, but this energetic warfare isn't over yet. Tonight on this full moon, things will get crazy, and maybe I'll try to get the demons to leave you alone. Although all they want is to eat your soul. You poor tormented little thing hiding in false confidence and false power. We pity you. Truly. I pray you have protection methods. Copy pasta anyone? Message 2. I really don't want to have to bring this curse down, but you know, the demons got me and I have to do their bidding or else I'm the one getting hurt, so I hope you understand. I'm so sorry for all of this. The Abyss demands balance and justice for what you've done. I wasn't moved by their prose and blocked this account as well. There was one more account created to harass me, after which I assumed this person ran out of email addresses. A little while later, after a period of silence from this person, I decided to turn on anonymous messages again. To my dismay, shortly after I changed the setting back, hate messages started trickling back in, using the same language I've come to expect from my usual harasser. At one point, I received a heartfelt apology, clearly from the same person who had been writing the other hateful messages. However, one day later, after I'd posted their apology, they instantly backtracked and started up the harassment again. However, at the same time, I began getting anonymous messages from somebody who said they noticed from my photos that we live near each other. They said they were interested in becoming friends, but were too shy to reveal themselves. I gently prodded this person to message me from their actual account, and they eventually did. This person introduced themselves as Elm. They were a non-binary person who was new to the area and didn't know many people outside of their work. We chatted for a bit and found some common ground. They were way more spiritual than I was, but I'm not disinterested in that kind of thing, so we talked about our individual theologies. Their spirituality set off a little red flag. I suspected that perhaps they could have been the one who sent the cursed message, so I asked a question as a test. Do you know much about astrology? Previous messages had made extensive use of my birth chart when insulting me. They responded, barely, so I breathed a little sigh of relief and marked them off as safe in my head. Since this harassment was still an issue to me at the time, I decided to tell them about it. In response, they said, "Wow, that's honestly pretty scary. I'm sorry we got some bitter person coming at your throat like that." Anyways, after a few days, I had begun to consider this person a friend. We weren't the most compatible, but they were having a rough time and I had the time and resources to help them out. After a bit, we decided to meet up. My usual weed man had run dry and they had somebody that I could buy from, so I agreed to pick them up at their place and we would go get the pot and then chill at mine. They met me at their apartment's leasing office, which they claimed was because they needed to pay rent. We picked up the weed and went back to my apartment. We ended up driving way longer than expected due to being given a wildly incorrect address. Therefore, I was unexpectedly tired by the time we arrived at my apartment. On the way up to my apartment, they tripped and fell, twisting their ankle. I offered them an ankle compress to mitigate the injury and they took it. We smoked and chatted for a while. The interaction was normal, maybe a little awkward. Elm had a manic energy that would seem to randomly flab, after which they'd snap back to their frenetic disposition. My exhaustion from the extra long drive cut out our hangout short because I had to drive them home before I became too exhausted to operate a car safely. They seemed kind of disappointed. I assumed this was just because we had only hung out for a short time. I dropped them off back at home and had a generally positive regard for Elm afterwards. I never saw that ankle compress again. The anonymous messages began to dry up, although I still got them and they were still nasty. I messaged Elm occasionally and I was intending to take them to a nearby formal garden. Then suddenly I got a message from Elm. They said we didn't have enough in common and that they weren't interested in being friends with me anymore. I was taken aback by this a little and hurt. I had never experienced a friend breaking up with me like that yet. Somehow I still didn't feel suspicious of them. By absolute coincidence, on the same day, my best friend Monica logged into her Tumblr account for the first time in over a year. She had received hateful messages dated to spring 2019 that were clearly from the same person that had been harassing me. This felt like the nail in the coffin as far as damning evidence against Judah. There was precisely one mutual friend that knew the Tumblrs of both Monica and me, and it was him. With that, I felt confident to proceed with confronting him. Immediately, he claimed he knew nothing about the messages, and I wasn't surprised that he denied it, so I pressed on. However, he mentioned something that caught my attention. He knew that his partner had sent a hateful message to me after I had written that writing advice. Apparently, they had gotten jealous after learning of our past relationship. I checked his last Instagram posts. My heart sank. I said, "Wait, is your partner Elm?" He said, "Yeah, they are, but they insist they have nothing to do with what you're getting now." I said, "There's something messed up here. Like really messed up. I find it very, very strange that they met me without ever letting on they were involved with you, and just today they said we can't be friends anymore." At this point, I assume it was Judah's heart that sank. He asked me some clarifying questions, and I told him the timeline of our meeting and let him know that I gave him my ankle brace. He said they never told him anything about us hanging out and that they said they got the brace from work. Just then, it felt like all the information I gathered in the last year was swirling around me like a whirlwind. This whole time, the blame that I had assigned to Judah belonged to Elm. This person violently hated me without ever having met me and used deceit to earn my trust enough for me to let him into my home. Elm had been actively harassing me for 5 months by the time they reached out and revealed themselves, and the lies continued for 3 more months after that. They had even lied about not being knowledgeable about astrology so as to not implicate themselves and avoid being caught. Days passed and the hateful messages stopped suddenly and completely, exposing Elm's guilt beyond a doubt. Judah reached out to let me know that he and Elm had separated, and that was the last that I heard from either of them. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't caught her hangout short that day. Maybe I wouldn't really have anything to worry about. Perhaps they were all bark and no bite, but they were clearly hiding some very deep troubles under that excitable facade. When I was growing up, my older brother raced flat track motorcycles, and as a result, my dad and he were gone most weekends during the racing season. Sometimes my mom, my younger sister, and I would tag along, but my mom was never really into it, so she would keep my sister and me home most of the time. and plan fun things for us girls to do during the weekend. This incident happened on one of the weekends when we stayed home back in 1987, so I was 10 and my sister was 8. It started out like any other Saturday with my dad and brother being gone. My mom took us out to eat McDonald's, we went to the mall, and then we came home to play Monopoly and watch cable. At around 10 p.m., my sister and I started to get sleepy, so my mom brought out the sleeping bags for all 3 of us to sleep in the living room together. I had to ask my mom years later what time it was because as a kid, I didn't pay attention to the clock so much. So around 2 a.m., somebody starts banging on our front door. Our front door was pretty strange. It had 4 large panes of glass that weren't opaque, so they were covered with small curtains. We all wake up to this pounding and rush to the door and look out the windows. And there's this girl at the door. She was probably in her late teens or early 20s. I remember her wearing a white and blue windbreaker. She's frantic and crying and begging my mom to let her in because she said her boyfriend is chasing her and she's afraid he's going to kill her. My mom remained calm as heck in a scary situation and said, "I'm sorry, my love. I can't let you in because I've got 2 young children with me and I can't risk your boyfriend harming them if he gets in. I can call the police for you if you just stay here." Of course, that didn't sit well with the girl as she started crying more and more, pointing to her foot that was broken and in a cast, saying, "Please, man, you have to let me in. He's coming for me." Again, my mom politely refused and turning her into the kitchen called the cops. Our phone was mounted on the wall in the kitchen with a ridiculously long cord, so she was able to get back to the door while on the phone with dispatch and told her that the police were on the way. This made the girl go even crazier and she said, "I don't need the police because I'll be dead before they get here." My mom kept apologizing and said she was sorry, but she wasn't going to open the door no matter what. At this point, the girl just turned around and walked off into the darkness, and about 5 to 6 minutes later, police showed up. My mom gives a statement, and as she's doing so, my dad and brother come home from the race. My dad didn't even turn off the truck. He just ran up and looked terrified, asking what's going on. While my mom is telling my dad what happened, another officer walks up and says that he didn't see anyone but found a shoe in the street in front of our house. The police leave and we all sit in the living room for a bit to decompress, and I remember thinking that maybe my mom wasn't being very nice to the girl and should have just let her in. Fast forward many years later, and it's about a week after I give birth to my first son. Family and friends are at my house and doting on my baby. After most people leave, there are just my parents, my sister, me, and my son sitting in my living room this time. And I made a comment about how I didn't really love the neighborhood we moved to, but I was proud of actually having my own home with my husband. Then my sister says, "Hey mom, remember that lady that came to our door demanding to come in?" My mom says, "Yes, very well I do." At this point, I can tell my mom and dad weren't comfortable talking about it because they gave each other nervous glances. So my sister, being the asshole that she can be, says, "Why didn't you just let her in? I wonder if her boyfriend ended up killing her." My dad interjects and says that my mom did the right thing because it was late and we were home alone. Then he adds this little end to it. Plus, they ended up finding her in a car with her boyfriend smoking dope a few blocks over. They had rope, duct tape, 2 shovels, and a lot of knives in the trunk. My sister and I said in unison, "What?" I asked why we were never told about that, and my dad said they decided not to tell us so that we wouldn't feel unsafe in our own home. Finding this out made me feel like a huge jerk because I had always thought that my mom was being somewhat rude, and I always wondered what happened to the girl. Now I know my mom most likely prevented a home invasion with her tough but right decision to deny this girl entry into her home. Learning about that sent chills down my spine. Even writing it out now gives me goosebumps. My buddy Cole and I have done this trip every October for 6 years running. Same marina, same rental vessel, same 12 miles out to the same stretch of water where the striped bass get thick in the fall. It's the kind of thing that becomes its own ritual without you deciding it will. You just do it enough times and suddenly it's the thing you look forward to most all year. I'm telling you that so you understand I know that boat. I know what it looks like when we leave the marina. And I know what it looks like after a day on the water, and I know the difference between something that was there before and something that wasn't. We were about 2 hours out when the call came through on channel 16, I think. Male voice, controlled but with something underneath it. Giving coordinates and saying they'd struck something in the water and they were taking on water fast. 2 souls aboard, requesting immediate assistance. Cole looked at me and I looked at the GPS. They were maybe a mile off our port side. I want to say I hesitated. I didn't. You don't hesitate on a distress call 12 miles offshore. We came about and throttled up and covered the distance in under 10 minutes. The boat was a center console, similar in size to ours, sitting low but not the way a floating boat sits. More like it was weighted wrong. There was damage to the port side, a long crumpling impact scar that had breached the gunwale, but the breach was high enough that at current conditions, they weren't taking on significant water. Not the emergency the call described. I noticed that before we'd even pulled alongside. 2 men on the deck. The one at the bow raised his hand when he saw us, relieved, waving us in. The other one was at the stern, with his back to us looking out at the water. They came aboard fast. The talker introduced himself as Doug. Early 40s, broad-shouldered. The kind of guy who fills a room with his presence, even on an open boat. Warm handshake, direct eye contact. Story already coming out of him before Cole had finished tying off. They'd been running at speed and hit something submerged. Debris or a deadhead log took the impact on the port side and thought they were going to go down. He laughed a little bit telling it, the laugh of relief, and Cole laughed with him. The other one, who Doug called Warren, sat down at the stern and put his hands between his knees and looked at the deck. He was thinner than Doug, pale in a way that could have been shock or could have been something else. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't look up when Cole offered them water. He just sat there with his hands between his knees, running something behind his eyes that had nothing to do with relief. I went below to get the extra life jackets. We were now 4 people on a boat, rated for 4. And I wanted everything above board if we crossed the Coast Guard on the way in. I opened the storage bench along the port side of the cabin and pulled out on the jackets, and it was turning to go back up when the light caught something on the side of the bench. A dark smear low down near the hinge, partially wiped. Somebody had gone over it quickly with something, a rag or a sleeve, but hadn't finished the job or hadn't cared enough to finish it. I crouched down and looked at it without touching it. I knew what it was. I've been hunting and fishing my whole life, and I know blood when I see it. I stood up slowly and looked around the cabin. The door handle to the head had a transfer smear on it, the kind you get when someone grabs something with a wet hand and wipes it, but not all the way. Same color and same consistency. I stood there in the cabin for a moment with the life jackets in my hands and breathed and thought about what I was looking at and what it meant. Then I heard Cole laughing at something Doug set up on the deck, and I went back up. I gave them the jackets and didn't say anything. Cole gave me a look-alike. What took so long? And I gave him nothing back, and he let it go. Doug kept talking. That was the thing about him. He never stopped, filling every silence with something. Stories about other fishing trips, questions about our setup, and comments about the weather. It was the behavior of a man who needed the air occupied. I watched him and I watched Warren, and I watched the distance between where they were sitting and where our radio was mounted at the helm. Then Doug asked how much longer until we reached the marina. I told him 40 minutes, give or take. He nodded and asked if I radioed ahead to let anyone know we were coming with survivors. I said, not yet. He nodded again and said, no rush, just curious. 10 minutes later, he asked if the marina logged our return time automatically or if we had to check in manually. I told him manually. He said, interesting, just making conversation. Warren had moved. He was no longer at the stern. He was sitting amidship now, closer to the center of the boat, and I realized that he'd done it gradually, enough that neither of us had noticed the transition. He was sitting equidistant, between me at the helm and Cole at the bow, and between both of us on the radio. I told Cole I needed him to take the wheel and went below. I got on the radio and kept my voice low and gave our position and vessel name and said we had 2 distressed survivors aboard when we were requesting a welfare check at the marina upon arrival. Standard language, really. Nothing that would alarm anyone listening above deck if the wind were right. I was reaching to hang the handset up when I heard the steps on the cabin stairs. Doug filled the doorway. He looked at the radio and then he looked at me, and then the friendliness was gone. Not replaced by anything loud or aggressive. Just gone, like a light switching off. Leaving something flat and steady underneath that was worse than what anger would have been. He said that wasn't necessary. I said I thought it was. He came down to the last 2 steps in the cabin, and he was bigger and then closed space, taking up more of it than the dimension should have allowed. He told me again, quietly, that it wasn't necessary and that I should let him know before I did something like that again. The way he said it wasn't a request. I told him I'd already done it. Something moved through his expression and then settled. He looked at the radio for a moment, then looked at me and made a decision I could see him making. He went back up the stairs without another word. I stood in the cabin for a count of 30 before I followed him up. Cole was still at the wheel, oblivious, and Warren was back at the stern looking at the water. Doug was sitting amidships again like nothing had happened. An easy smile back in place, but he didn't take his eyes off me for the rest of the trip in. Not once. The Coast Guard patrol boat met us at the marina entrance. 2 officers came aboard and asked Doug and Warren to come with them for a standard survivor debrief, and routine language that I knew and they apparently knew wasn't routine. Doug went without argument. Warren went without word. Same as everything else. I gave my statement to a sheriff's deputy on the dock while Colt stood next to me, saying very little because I'd filled him in on the way in and he was still processing it. I told them about the blood in the cabin. They went aboard and were down there for a long time. An investigator called me 4 days later. He told me they'd gone back out to Doug in Warren's vessel, which was still anchored at the coordinates where they called from. He told me what they'd found on it, and I'm not going to write all of that out because some of it is still part of an active investigation, I assume, and some of it I just don't want to put into words, to be honest. What I will say is that there had been a third person on that boat. Third person who was not Doug and was not Warren and was not anywhere anymore. The investigator was careful with his language the whole call. At the end, I asked him directly what he thought happened out there. He was quiet for a moment and then said something they were working to establish a clear picture. I looked at the maritime distress regulations after I hung up. Channel 16, the frequency they called on, is internationally monitored, and any vessel within range that receives a distress call is legally and morally obligated to respond. You have to go. There's no choice. Doug knew that. He knew that when he picked up the radio and made that call. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew exactly the kind of people who would respond, and he counted on the fact that we wouldn't ask the right questions until it was too late to matter. He was almost right. Cole doesn't talk about it much. We haven't done the October trip since, and I don't know if we will. I still think about Warren sitting there with his hands between his knees, looking at the deck the whole way in, never speaking, never eating or drinking anything, just sitting there with whatever he knew was sitting right there with him. Think about the blood on the bench that somebody wiped in a hurry and didn't finish. I think about who did that wiping and why they stopped. This happened in my first year at university in Australia. I was moving out of home for the first time, and I think this made me very naive in the situation. I found a cheap place in the city, near my workplace in uni at the time. $150 per week for a room in a share house, only 20 minutes out from the CBD. It seemed like an awesome deal to me. I messaged the landlord and told her I was interested. Before she gave me a time to come inspect the place, she seemed overly interested in my ethnic background. I'm half Ethiopian, so I definitely don't look white. But when I told her I'm Australian, she suddenly became withdrawn. I thought it was strange. Maybe she thought I was lying because she had seen my profile photo on flatmates.com, so I explained my background. She seemed satisfied with my answer, and we organized a time for me to come see the room. I called the landlord, Denise. Denise showed me around and talked as if the place were already mine, which I thought was exciting. There was a main house with 5 bedrooms, a caravan on the side, and a granny flat behind it with 3 bedrooms, which is where I'd be moving in. The main house and caravan were full, 7 people living there, but only one of the rooms in the granny flat was occupied. It was nice enough considering, and very clean. A weekly cleaner was included in the rent price, as well as the weekly maintenance. I didn't think to ask what that meant because I was already pretty sound moving in. I met the people who would go to be on my housemates, and all of them were foreigners, mostly Chinese or South Korean who had come to study. I didn't find this weird at all. I mean, there are plenty of international students here. The door to my room had a lock on it, and I was told by Denise that her and I only had a key, but Denise never usually came to the house, so there was a nice level of privacy. A week after I moved in, I met the maintenance guy. I'll call him Patrick. He seemed to be gardening and came over to introduce himself. He seemed nice enough. I found out he's Denise's brother, and he looked to be in his late 40s or so. Found him to be a bit awkward, but I had been raised to be polite to a fault, so I ended up talking to him for a long time before going back to my room. I don't remember what we talked about, but I remember he kept saying things like I was very beautiful and describing my skin as exotic and caramel more than once, which rubbed me the wrong way. A few days later, the cleaner comes also. She is super lovely and has known Denise and Patrick for a long time. She and I had a nice chat, and for some reason, she brought up that Patrick was on the autism spectrum, so to me, that explained his awkwardness, and I realized he's harmless, so I felt bad about my initial judgment of him. Next time I saw him, I came out into the kitchen and saw him standing there. This struck me as odd. 1, it was the morning, and I was in my pajamas, having just woken up. 2, he's the maintenance guy. I didn't understand why he should be inside, but still felt bad, so I just smiled and said hello. He turned and seemed startled, but explained to me that he was just taking out the trash. I saw that he had replaced the bins in the kitchen, so I was just like, oh, okay. He was trying to be nice, I guess. But I told him he really didn't have to do that. He kind of just insisted, and I was like, alright, whatever. I ended up talking to him again. Again, he seemed to have a weird fixation with me being exotic, even though I told him I was born in Australia. But mostly, he was just generally asking how I was finding the place, and he reiterated that everything was super safe, and for some reason brought up the keys to the bedrooms. He said only I, Denise, and he had the keys. I didn't say anything out loud, but in my head I thought, wait, Since when does he have a key? But I still just kind of brush it off. Cut to a few months later, I work about 4 to 6 days a week casually, as well go to uni 4 days. So I'm rarely there during the day and lock my bedroom door before leaving every day. I don't remember exactly what time of year this would have been, but I know it was colder and I hadn't used the ceiling fan in my room for a while. I got home, unlocked my door, and the ceiling fan was on. This struck me as odd immediately. I knew I hadn't turned it on in forever. I was very, very confused and thought that I turned it on while leaving and just didn't remember. I brought it up with my roommate and she just kind of shrugged and said that it was odd, but didn't seem weirded out by it, so I figured I was overthinking it. Note, I kept to myself a lot, wasn't close to any of my roommates, and only talked to this woman occasionally. A few weeks later, I'm leaving for work and I have a very strange feeling while walking to the front gate of the house. For some reason, I turn around and I see Patrick, hiding behind some bushes staring at me. As soon as he is caught, he turns and pretends to be gardening. In the moment, my mind is actually kind of going blank. I was like, surely he wasn't watching me. All I did was frown and wonder to myself why he would stare at me like that and then pretend he hadn't been. I come back later in the day, unlock my door, walk in, and again something is wrong. But this time I can't put my finger on it. I stand in my room looking around, staring at everything in the room, but I can't find anything. When I realize that I don't know what I'm looking for, I feel creeped out and leave my room and tell my roommate again that I thought somebody had been in my room. This time she sat down with me and basically said she thought somebody went in her room recently too. We chatted and she said that she had left her bedroom window open when she went to work, and when she came home it was shut. I brought up the fan again and roommate said maybe we should let Denise know. So I texted Denise and said something along the lines of, I think someone's been going into my room because of X and X events, and my roommate said the same thing. I exchanged a few messages with Denise, but the general response from her was just, oh wow, that's bizarre. Again, being super naive, young, and too polite for my own good, I assumed that I was overreacting and didn't want to seem like a bad tenant. Thankfully, it turns out Denise was more sympathetic than I realized because she said she was going to have the locks changed the next day. I was like, yay, thanks, and assumed that would be it. But in my head I was thinking, only 3 people would have the keys. Me, Denise, and Patrick, so if somebody had been coming in, wouldn't it have been one of us 3? Which is why I didn't feel good when Patrick showed up the next day to change the lock himself. Being the maintenance guy and all, I ended up leaving while he did the change. I got a text later saying it was done and the new keys were in the mailbox. Fast forward, I had now been at this place for nearly a year, but now I was aware that Patrick seemed to come over about twice a week and he always came inside the house to take out the rubbish, but never seemed to really do maintenance work. I chalked it up to Denise giving him a job because maybe he couldn't find one elsewhere and I tried to avoid him. As far as I remember, nothing else seemed strange until now. I come home from work again and walk into my bedroom while I'm getting my clothes to shower. I noticed something very, very strange that was definitely not there when I left. There was some whitish and pale gunk kind of splattered upwards on the wall and floor. Honestly, my first thought when looking at it after a while was like, that looks like donut glaze or something. I leaned closer to it but still didn't really register what the stuff was, only that I definitely hadn't spilled anything there at all, so again I got creeped out and went to the kitchen to grab a rag and wipe it up when I had a thought like, wait, that's semen. I really didn't know what to look for, but as soon as I had that thought, nothing could convince me otherwise, and again my door had been locked. Only I, Denise, and Patrick had keys. My roommate wasn't home, but I called Denise right away. She didn't answer, so I instead messaged her and said basically, somebody had been in my room and there was some weird stuff splattered on the wall. I wanted to see if she came to the conclusion I did. Her response this time was really off. She messaged back hours later and was dismissive, saying something like, yeah, very weird. Lock has been changed though. And I was like, yeah, obviously, so who do you think would have been in there? I felt so weird and grossed out that I went to a friend's place and messaged my stepdad about it. I told him everything for the first time and guess it sounds a lot worse all at once. Because his response was, hell no, you're moving out of there now. I called Denise and told her I was going to move out if she wasn't taken seriously. This is when I realized that the leasing situation at this place was dodgy, which I didn't know beforehand due to lack of experience and no sense to ask. Essentially, there was no record of me actually being a tenant and I was kind of just sending money into this lady's bank account, but there wasn't any official paperwork. I looked back over the stuff I'd signed when I initially moved in and it was typed up by Denise, I assume. I don't remember many details, but it wasn't official at all. Super naive. So I was able to move out ASAP. Denise didn't put up a fuss about the short notice. When I came back the next day, the stuff on the wall was gone, so I didn't have any proof of what happened, but that just kind of confirmed to me that something weird was going on with Denise and Patrick. My stepdad helped me take all of my stuff. I didn't have much. Denise just left a message and said, please leave the keys on the counter. It took me a few weeks to process every creepy thing that happened throughout my stay and put it all together as a massive creep fest. My roommate left soon after. Months later, she messaged me to say that one of the old housemates told her police were called to the place. I don't know why or what happened, but I suspect it wasn't for the tenants. This happened a few years ago when I was still living with my mom and I had borrowed her car to see my then boyfriend for the evening. It was around midnight when I got back to my neighborhood, so the roads were empty. And that's when I noticed this dirty, rundown, rusted white utility van that a maintenance guy would drive, following me. I never saw the driver's face, but I got this immediate sinking feeling in my stomach because something felt wrong about the van. Now, I was only 20 at the time, but I knew better than to just drive straight to my house and let this person know exactly where I live. No matter how desperately I wanted to just go home and ignore it. But I also wasn't 100% sure they were actually following me to begin with. I didn't want to jump to conclusions just because it was late and I was alone and being paranoid. So I drove to a shopping complex a few minutes out of the way that's well lit and has a public library to see if I was followed there. I thought I lost the van, but decided to wait in the parking lot for a few more minutes because I had a bad feeling I just couldn't shake. Sure enough, the van showed up and was driving in random circles around the parking lot, looking for me. This scared me quite a bit, so I drove towards the big mall. Here that's always got security and police presence because it was the midway point between where I was and where I lived. I parked in a pretty well lit, although empty 24-hour McDonald's parking lot where I had a great view of the roads in the mall, but I wasn't super easy to spot and waited to see if the van showed up looking for me. It did, and of course, this would be the one time security and the cops were nowhere to be found, which was half the reason I decided to head there in the first place. Realizing whoever was driving this van was 100% actively following me in the middle of the night, I knew just driving home was not an option, and that's a terrifying realization. Luckily, the police station is just a few minutes away from where I was, so I try and discreetly drive away, hoping the van hadn't noticed me yet. I wasn't that lucky because it wasn't long before the van was back in my rearview mirror. At this point, I'm panicking pretty bad and my anxiety is extremely high. I finally pulled into the police station parking lot, and seconds later, the van came to a stop in the middle of the road for no more than a few seconds. I'm guessing just long enough for them to realize where I led them, and they took off immediately, and so fast. I did make it home safe and without seeing the van again not long after, but this whole ordeal took up at least an hour of my night. It was after 1 a.m. by the time I made it home, and I was terrified the whole time. I don't know what this guy's specific intention was, but honestly, I don't need to know. I know it was nothing good, and I likely avoided a very bad situation. If you think somebody is following you, it's not stupid or paranoid to make sure you aren't right. Who knows what might have happened if I had led them to my house or gotten out of the car. When I was about 16 years old, I worked at a restaurant as a pianist. It was a nice semi-formal restaurant, not very trendy, but seen as a well-established place where parents would take their graduating children and elderly couples would have date nights. With white tablecloths and fresh flowers on the table, it was a pretty popular place. It was a great gig, especially since I was quite young and my parents would drop me off in the evenings twice a week, Friday and Saturday night shifts. It was in an older part of town, the kind of place where you don't go walking at night. I live in South Africa though, so you pretty much never walk at night anyway. We have car guards in most South African cities, and while there are sometimes dodgy guys trying to make some quick drug money because they found a reflective vest in the trash, my restaurant had a wonderful guy. His name was Daddy. He was a huge dude from Zimbabwe. He'd always walk me up the path when my parents dropped me off and come to tell me when my parents had arrived to pick me up. Part of my pay was a free staff meal, and on this occasion, my brother had decided to come in early with me so we could eat together. As we walked in, the owner immediately saw me and dashed over to us, clearly bursting to tell me something. Apparently earlier that day, a man had come in and asked him if the pianist started at 8 tonight as usual. The owner, Paul, had confirmed yes and asked if he wanted to book a table. He said no, and Paul, seeing he looked like he probably couldn't afford to eat there anyway, had asked why he'd inquired. The man informed him that he had a dream and that he was coming to marry the pianist. The pianist was his soulmate, and he wasn't going to miss out on this chance to let her know. Quite bewildered at this information, and thinking maybe a friend from school was playing a joke, I'd asked what the guy looked like. I remember Paul trying to put it nicely. Well, he was sort of short, maybe 30 years old, plump and long hair, had a hat on. I had no friends who matched the description, and at this stage I was the only female pianist at the establishment, so my mother and I were quite weirded out. We sat down on the closed-in balcony to order, right by a big window. It was about 7:45. dark outside, and I was getting ready to leave the table to start playing when a movement in the shrubs outside my window caught my eye. "Mom," I whispered, and she looked over to where I had jerked my head. There, skulking outside the window and watching us, was a short, very overweight guy. He was wearing all black with a dirty black trench coat and a black fedora. He had long, dark, stringy hair and a large silver cross hanging around his neck. It was a sinking, horrible feeling realizing he was watching me. I didn't know if it was mostly because I was pretty young and sheltered, but realizing that this strange man knew who I was, what I looked like, thought about me and wanted to marry me made me feel almost debilitated with fear. My mom, however, quickly realized that while I was in the view of the window, she wasn't. She told me, "Stay here," and got up and left the table, staying out of view of the man. She went to the manager and got him to phone Daddy on his cell phone. We were sitting towards the back of the restaurant and Daddy was on the street. After about a minute of me sitting there, pretending not to notice the beady-eyed, sweaty-looking man outside, I saw the light of Daddy's torch bouncing off the hedges. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man start to scuffle around, trying to work out which way to go. I took this opportunity to stand up and get away from the window. I sat in the back until Daddy came in to tell me that it was okay to start playing. They never told me whether he ran away or had to be removed, or what exactly happened. They wouldn't tell me any details at all, which sort of just made me more apprehensive. Daddy just told me that he would never let him back in. Told me that he drove a rusty red small car. I'd later found out it was a really old Uno. I found out because every 2 weeks or so, one of the nights I was working, it'd be parked down the street, far enough from the restaurant that Daddy wouldn't make out leave. Sometimes even around the corner, out of sight until we were driving home. I knew the sound of the car, the ratty old exhaust pipe. I knew the number plate. Sometimes when we drove past, I could see a shadow of him in the driver's seat. Sometimes I couldn't. I always wondered where he was then. From then on, my parents had Daddy's number saved to their phones, and my dad would come get me when it was dark. Sometimes when I was waiting to be picked up if we were closed early, I started heading down the path to see if my parents were back. Daddy would see me from the gate. Sometimes he beckoned to come down and wait with him, and we'd hang out. Sometimes he shook his head. "Not yet, sissy." That's when the car would be down the street. I never really saw the man again, so there was never really anything I could do about it. It was always in the back of my mind, though. I continued to work there until my final year of high school, and I quit when he moved back up to Zimbabwe. So I, 19 female, was at a house party a couple of days ago. I only really knew a couple of people there and it was packed. I hung around with my two friends there for a while, having some drinks. After a while, my friends went into this room that everybody was hotboxing. I didn't go because I really didn't feel like drinking and being stoned at a party where I barely knew anybody. So I just mingled for a bit, then went on my phone talking to my other friends. I noticed this guy that kept staring at me up and down, and I instantly felt my stomach sink. I'm no stranger to people trying to catch my eye to strike up conversation or flirt, but I instantly had a horrible feeling about this dude. I looked back down at my phone and sent my location to my friends, just letting them know where I was because things were changing from feeling chill to sketchy. There were a bunch of cans of soda in the kitchen, so I got up to grab a Sprite instead of having any more drinks. I brought my own alcohol even. I never take drinks from strangers. As I'm there, the same guy that kept looking at me comes in and starts trying to get me to take his drink in a red soda cup. I was like, "Nah, I have a Sprite, thanks though." He kept trying and I was getting annoyed because he kept being super pushy, and I'm being very blunt, so I was like, "Look, I don't want your drink or your company," and I walked away. I thought it would be the end of it and pushed it to the back of my mind as one of my friends came out from the hotbox room stoned and happy. We hung out some more and my friend wanted a cigarette, so I went on the balcony with her. As we were there, she put her cigarettes on the ledge, and as she was talking animatedly, her arm pushed her cigarettes off and they fell into the yard. I was going to go downstairs and outside with her to get them, but she told me she had to grab something from the car anyways and that she'd be right back. I decided to just wait there for her. On my phone here, the door opened and I expected it to be her. As I'm about to say, that was quick. I spun around and I'm face to face with that guy from earlier. He just grabbed my face and kissed me, and I pushed at his chest and said, "What the heck, dude? Did you not hear what I said?" He proceeded to say something in Spanish. I can't speak it at all, but I could pick up a few words he was saying, like puta and something else I can't remember. I had a friend who was an exchange student and she told me all of the naughty words. I told him to screw off and went to push past him to go back inside, and he proceeded to push me up against the wall, try to kiss me. That's when I pushed him as hard as I could away, but he let go of my wrist and grabbed my throat hard, while maintaining eye contact and smiling at me the whole time. Just when he used his other hand and grabbed my ass, my friend came back from getting her cigarettes, poked her head out and saw what was happening, and she tried to intervene, but he pushed her with his other hand, and I heard her say, "What the heck? Hell no," and she grabbed the closest guy to the door from inside and brought him out. A random heroic guy from inside then grabbed the crazy throat grabber, putting him in some type of hold and started screaming at him. He got kicked out. Pretty sure somebody punched him in the face too. Everybody was super apologetic and said they didn't even know that guy and weren't sure who he even was. I wasn't about to call the cops or anything because I wasn't going to get the party busted, but I went to the bathroom and immediately started crying. Called my friends. My friends here weren't sober enough to drive and they came to get me. I have a couple finger mark bruises on my neck still, and I'd hate to think of what would have happened had my friend been distracted by something and not come outside when she did. At least I know my intuition works great, but let me say, I'm not going to a party where I barely know anyone anymore. That was super scary.